The old man's name was barely whispered before the courtroom fell into an eerie silence. Walter Keene stood in handcuffs, his back bowed, wrists trembling, as the bailiff read out his charges like they meant nothing. Then it happened. Nathan Ross, the young prosecutor known for his cold efficiency, suddenly rose from his chair and stood at full attention. No one understood why. No one moved. Not the judge. Not the crowd. Just a room full of breath held in disbelief. Hours before, this same man had been dragged off the sidewalk for trying to save a younger veteran, seizing on the cold pavement. Wrongly accused. Wrongly arrested. Left with nothing but his word and an invisible past. And yet, that invisible past would return with a force no one expected. And in the end, the one standing alone would leave the courtroom in silence, saluted by the very man who once held his fate. If you've ever believed quiet courage deserves to be seen, keep watching. Comment honor if you believe some debts are sacred. And follow this channel if you still carry faith in what this country owes its quietest heroes. Walter Keene was 68, though his shoulders still carried the tension of a younger man who hadn't yet surrendered to time. His face, lined, sunburnt, and shadowed by days without proper rest, wore the gray stubble of someone who had long since stopped counting mourning. A faded baseball cap sat low on his brow, and his flannel shirt, worn thin at the elbows, hid arms that once lifted wounded men through dust and fire. He moved slowly, with the stiffness of old injuries and cold nights. But there was a precision to him. The way he folded his blanket, the way he aligned his boots beside the cardboard boxes that held everything he owned. Every morning, at exactly 6:15, he walked 4 miles to the Via bus stop, not to ride, but to watch, to protect, to be there in case someone younger fell the way he once did. No one ever asked why. No one ever thanked him. Behind Wu's laundromat, his life reduced to 8 neatly stacked boxes, one filled with medals too painful to sell, one with medical textbooks no longer relevant, and one with a photo of 3 children who hadn't called in over a decade. Walter had served 3 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan as a Marine combat medic. He'd seen Fallujah, Mosul, Ramadi. He'd sown flesh beneath rocket fire. The VA had lost his records twice, delayed his case 3 years. The city had forgotten him entirely. Restaurant managers looked through him. Officers saw only a man without ID. But that day, when a young veteran in a worn jacket collapsed at the curb, seizing, trembling, Walter's eyes caught it before it even began. A twitch in the hands, a shake in the jawline. Something deep in his bones told him this wasn't going to be just another Tuesday. The seizure came fast, barely a twitch in the fingers, a stiffening in the shoulders. Then the young man collapsed like a marionette with its strings cut, hitting the pavement hard. His limbs jerked, his mouth foamed, and his eyes rolled back in a silent scream. Walter didn't hesitate. His knees buckled as he dropped beside him, old joints straining, hands steady with instinct. "You're all right, soldier. I've got you," he murmured, rolling the young man onto his side, wedging a weathered boot beneath the boy's head to stop it from striking concrete. Across the street, behind the glass of an upscale restaurant, a waiter froze, then slipped inside. Walter's voice cracked across the air, sharp and urgent. "Help! I need help! Now!" Inside, a manager peeked through the blinds. Then the door shut. No one came. Walter's voice rose again. Deeper now, sharper, his tone carrying the weight of authority. "This man is having a seizure. He needs medical assistance." But the door remained closed. A moment later, someone called, not for an ambulance, but for police. "There's a homeless guy outside, yelling at customers," the manager whispered. "Looks unstable." The squad car arrived just as the convulsions stopped. The young man lay limp, breath ragged. Walter was still kneeling, hand on his chest, checking rhythm. "Sir? "Step away," barked the officer. "He needs medical, not? Step away now," the cop shouted again, hand drifting to his taser. Walter's hands rose slowly, palms open. His voice was low, calm, trained. "I'm a Marine combat medic. He's post-ictal. He's disoriented. Not dangerous." The second officer scoffed. "Sure you are, old-timer. No ID. No home. No one to vouch. Just an aging figure in worn clothes, kneeling in the wrong place at the wrong time." The young veteran mumbled something, dazed, then sat up slowly. The officers didn't question him, didn't ask for a statement. They helped him to a bench to wait for his via transport, then turned their attention to Walter. The handcuffs clicked. The door slammed. "You can't just disturb the peace and frighten people," the officer muttered. Walter didn't argue. He just turned his eyes toward the window, watching the boy on the bench shiver in the wind. Watched as the shuttle finally arrived and took him away. Inside the cruiser, the silence was heavier than the cuffs. But from across the street, in the alley behind the diner, a teenage girl paused. Phone still recording. Her eyes met Walter's through the glass. She didn't speak. Didn't wave. She just pressed her hand over her heart and nodded. The holding cell reeked of bleach and bitterness, walls stained with forgotten stories, benches cold and metal, built more for punishment than pause. Walter sat alone, hands folded neatly on his knees, back straight as if the cuffs had never been removed. Around him, men cursed and mumbled, some slouched into sleep, others pacing like animals caught in a trap. But Walter didn't speak. He stared at the floor with the stillness of someone who'd learned long ago that silence could be armor. No phone call. No lawyer. Just echoes bouncing off painted brick and the sound of keys too far to reach. When they finally called his name, he rose with a quiet grace, his knee locking slightly as he walked, every step measured but proud. They led him through corridors that smelled like damp paper and time, then into a courtroom too bright, too clean to believe justice still lived there. The public defender glanced at him once, sighed, and muttered, "Just plead. You'll be out with community service." Walter didn't reply. He adjusted the collar of his flannel shirt, as if preparing for inspection, and took his seat at the defendant's table like it meant something. The judge's voice was cool, efficient. The prosecutor, a young man in a navy suit, stood tall, rehearsed, polished. Walter Keene. Charges: disturbing the peace, resisting officer command, public nuisance. The list landed like slaps in a hallway. Walter sat still. He didn't blink. But then, the door at the back creaked. Boots hit the floor with a steady rhythm. Measured. Exact. Unhurried. The bailiff looked up. Then the prosecutor paused mid-sentence. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, brow creasing. The man walking into the courtroom wasn't loud, wasn't large, but he carried something heavier than rank. A storm in a uniform. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, dark tie loosened just enough to suggest he came fast, but didn't run. Jaw locked. Shoulders squared like stone. Eyes sharp enough to slice through pretense. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He walked to the front row, stood still. Then he looked at Walter, not as a stranger, but as a man remembering something that mattered. Walter lifted his eyes slowly. Their gazes met, and something passed between them. Recognition. History. Delondo. Debt. Dot. The judge noticed. "Sir, this is a closed proceeding," she began. But the prosecutor, his face paling, interrupted. "Your Honor, I need a recess." The room blinked. The request didn't match the moment. But, before questions formed, the man at the front turned slightly and spoke for the first time. "My name is Nathan Ross. My father is Colonel Daniel Ross, 3rd Battalion, 5 Marines. I believe this man saved his life." No one moved. The courtroom seemed to shrink into its own heartbeat. Somewhere, the flag in the corner fluttered slightly in the draft. Walter exhaled. Just once. And in that moment, no one needed an introduction. Everyone knew what came next. The courtroom no longer breathed. After Nathan Ross spoke his father's name, it was as if the walls leaned in to listen. The judge's gavel rested untouched. The prosecutor, Logan Myers, froze, notes slack in his hand, lips parted like a man about to speak, but forgetting every line he'd prepared. And then, Nathan took one slow step forward. Not toward the judge, not toward the bench, but toward Logan. There were 20 feet between them. It might as well have been a battlefield. Logan straightened, tried to reclaim the space with a tilt of his chin. "This is irrelevant," he said, voice tight. "The defendant." Nathan stopped him with a glance. Not angry, not loud, just inevitable, like a verdict that had already been sealed. "You ever hear your father cry, Logan?" Nathan asked, tone flat, eyes unblinking. "I have. Once. Just once. The night he told me about a man who dragged him through enemy fire. Bleeding out, too proud to scream. Said if that medic hadn't made it, I'd never have been born." Logan scoffed. Too quickly. Too forced. Anecdotes don't belong in court records. Nathan pulled something from his coat pocket. A phone. He tapped the screen once. The silence in the room sharpened. From the tiny speaker came the unmistakable voice of an older man. Raspy. Broken but sure. "If you ever meet a man named Walter Keene, you tell him Richard Ross still talks about him. Still walks because of him. Still breathes, because he refused to leave anyone behind." The sound stopped. Nathan looked up. "That's my father, Colonel Ross. Silver Star, Purple Heart. If you want to argue with that, I suggest you call him." Logan's jaw flexed. No one in the room moved. No one whispered. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between seconds. Nathan took another step. This time, closer. Just 2 feet from Logan now. "So tell me, counselor, the man you just tried to humiliate, what exactly were you planning to charge him with? Compassion?" Logan tried to hold the stare. Failed. His gaze dropped. To the folder, to his hands, to anywhere but Walter Keene. From the back row, a woman gasped softly. From the hallway, someone closed a file drawer with a muffled click. The judge said nothing. Didn't have to. Nathan turned once, slowly, his movement deliberate as a blade returning to its sheath. And in that stillness, Logan swallowed hard. Not because he'd lost the case, but because, for the first time, he realized what it meant to owe someone everything, and have them ask for nothing in return. The hallway outside the courtroom felt colder than it should have, filled with that peculiar silence reserved for moments when truth starts to rearrange a man's entire sense of self. Logan Myers stood motionless, the phone pressed to his ear, not as a tool, but as a confession booth. And when his father's voice finally answered, steady but aged with gravel and memory, Logan spoke not as a prosecutor. "Dad, I need to ask you something. I'm working a case. Older man, says he was a Marine combat medic. Name's Walter Keene." The silence that followed wasn't hesitation. It was reverence. "You're sure?" came the reply, hushed, like the name had pulled a ghost from the past. "Walter Keene. That's the man who carried me out, bleeding from my leg through 300 yards of gunfire in Mosul. I was done, Logan. He saved my life." Logan's grip tightened on the phone, shame crawling up his throat. He didn't say any of that. Just said he was helping a younger vet. He wouldn't. That's Keene. Never took credit. Never asked for thanks. I tried to convict him, Dad. Then came the words that would reshape the morning. "Then don't. You fix it." Back in the courtroom, Logan didn't walk like a prosecutor anymore. He moved like someone unarmed, stripped of ego, carrying a truth heavier than any case file. He stood before the judge and said what few prosecutors ever dare. "Your Honor, the prosecution moves to dismiss all charges." The judge raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "New evidence," Logan replied, voice even but shaken, "and a failure, mine eye, to see the full picture." She allowed him to approach. Whatever he whispered changed something in her eyes. First surprise, then the kind of understanding that leaves no room for objection. Nathan stepped forward, carrying a printed photo. A bystander's image, time-stamped and clear. Walter kneeling beside the young veteran, his hands protecting, not harming. The ripple that moved through the courtroom wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound made by people realizing they had misjudged a man who never asked them to notice him in the first place. "This contradicts the police report," Nathan said simply. No one spoke. Not the manager. Not the officers. Especially not Logan, who now stood beside Walter, not as accuser, but as witness. In the back, the restaurant manager who had made the call sat pale, his confidence now replaced by something quieter, something closer to shame. When Walter's eyes met his, the man looked away, unable to hold what he'd tried to bury. The bailiff walked toward him, not with force, but with finality. A hand rested on the man's shoulder. And just like that, the man who had made the accusation was the one left silent, while the veteran he had tried to erase walked free. Not with anger, not with pride, but with the unshakable dignity of someone who never stopped doing the right thing, even when no one else did. The courtroom had returned to stillness, but it was no longer the cold, dismissive silence that had once blanketed the room like dust. This was a quieter kind of noise, the kind that settles into the marrow when people begin to reckon with the echoes of their own inaction. No one spoke as Walter Keene gathered his belongings, his movements slow but unshaken, the same calm that once kept soldiers alive, now carrying him through the weight of everyone else's shame. He turned to leave, and that was when the first shift happened. Not loud, not sudden, just a breath caught in someone's throat. And then a voice, uncertain but honest, from the gallery behind. I'm sorry, sir." The voice belonged to a woman, mid-40s, well-dressed, likely one of the patrons from the restaurant that night. She didn't wait for a response. She just lowered her gaze, as if meeting his eyes would mean confronting every second she had looked away when he had asked for help. Another man stepped aside, clearing a path for Walter as he walked down the aisle. Then, as if some unspoken signal had passed between them, a young bailiff, barely out of basic, reached out with a small, neatly folded cloth. "For your hand, sir," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Walter accepted it without a word, just a nod. The hush deepened. No applause, no dramatic gestures, just the unmistakable weight of accountability, slowly shifting onto the shoulders of those who had once pretended not to see him. As he reached the doors, Logan Myers, still in his suit, but with the tie now loosened, as if the truth had made it hard to breathe, called after him. "Sergeant Keene, my father wanted me to tell you. He kept the promise." Walter stopped. He didn't turn fully, just slightly, enough for one shoulder to shift and his head to angle toward the voice. His eyes, weathered by years of both fire and silence, looked toward Logan with something between forgiveness and finality. "What promise was that?" the judge asked, her tone more human now than judicial. Logan took a breath, steadied himself. "When my father was being loaded onto the helicopter, bleeding out, he made Sergeant Keene promise to check on his family if he didn't make it." He glanced toward Walter, who stood still, unchanged, unshaken. But Sergeant Keene refused, told him, "You're going to live, Marine, and you're going to keep that promise yourself." A long pause followed. Then Walter gave the faintest smile. Not of pride, but of relief, like a burden long carried had just been returned to the earth. As he pushed open the courthouse doors, the world outside greeted him not with celebration, but with a quiet afternoon sun. washing the steps in amber light. A boy on a bicycle slowed to let him pass. A man tipped his cap. Doubts. No one said a word. But everything had changed. And as Walter stepped into that light, flag still folded in his arms, the voice in his mind, the one that had survived every war, every mistake, every empty night, spoke softly, not as a command, but as a prayer. This place used to feel like home. Maybe it can be again. The courthouse steps, once echoing with judgment and silence, now held a bronze plaque nestled into the stone near the flagpole. Quiet, unassuming, but permanent. It bore no seal of authority, no mayor's name. Just 7 words chosen by the local veterans chapter, etched by hand. To those who served when no one watched. No ceremony. No speeches. Only change, written in metal. Across town, inside Wu's laundromat, once the quiet shelter of a man forgotten. One corner now stood different. The cardboard boxes were gone. In their place, a glass cabinet, low and humble, holding a folded flag scorched at one corner, a yellowing field manual, and a black and white photograph of 3 children in the sun. Above it, on a hand-painted board, Walter's corner. No one asked Walter if they could do it. No one needed to. A retired school janitor had donated the cabinet. A boy from Troop 64 wrote the sign. Someone, no one knew, who, left his polished boots inside, perfectly aligned beneath the case. Walter never spoke about any of it. He still woke at 6. Still walked past the plaque. Still ordered plain coffee from the diner without raising his voice. But the nods came differently now. Slower, deeper, respectful. One mailman, pausing mid-route, simply said, "Glad you stayed." Walter had nodded once, then kept walking. It wasn't Walter who told the stories. It was others. A teenager made a short video project called The Man in the Corner. A local community college posted a tribute essay titled Still Serving. And slowly, word spread. Not viral, not loud, but steady like tidewater. "He's the one who helped my brother at the VA. He gave me his coat in winter. He never asked for thanks." The stories pulled people in. Young cadets came quietly, standing before the cabinet. Some left handwritten notes. Others simply stood in silence. One teacher, voice shaking, read aloud an old line Walter had once written in a letter long ago. "We aren't saved to be remembered. We save so others can live." And it stuck. It began showing up. Scrawled on school lockers, whispered during group drills, printed inside graduation programs. It wasn't branded or sponsored. It was felt. One day, a little boy, riding his bike, paused in front of Walter. The man sat by the window, flag folded on his lap. The boy asked, "Was it true? You carried someone in a war?" Walter didn't answer right away. He just looked down at the flag, thumb tracing the scorched edge. Then he looked up and nodded. Not for glory, not for pride, but because it happened. The boy stared for a long moment, then sat a little straighter on his bike and rode on. And Walter Keene stayed, not as a headline, not as a ghost, just a man who endured. A photo of him now hung by the door of Wu's, lit not by neon, but by morning sun. No spotlight, no anthem, just the light of a country remembering. Finally, the diner had emptied, but not fully. Just enough that the clinking of 2 spoons stirred in quiet rhythm could echo like footsteps in a chapel. Near the window, in a booth faded by time and sunlight, Walter sat across from Logan. Neither spoke for a long while. The coffee between them had gone cold, untouched, but neither moved to refill it. The air held a weight, not heavy with sadness, but with everything unspoken finally allowed to breathe. Walter's fingers, lined with scars and still as stone, wrapped around the chipped porcelain mug. Across from him, Logan sat with his tie loosened, jacket draped beside him, eyes cast downward, as if still searching for the right words in the cracks of the table. Then softly, like wind brushing across an old uniform, Logan said, "You okay, old man?" A twitch of a smile appeared in Walter's weathered face. Brief, barely there, but real. He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he reached beneath the booth, pulled out a folded cloth bundle, and gently placed it between them. Logan hesitated, then unfolded it slowly, revealing the same field scarf his father had worn under fire, the same one Walter had tied around a gaping leg wound while mortars screamed above. "You carried him," Logan whispered, voice low. "I knew he'd walk again," Walter said, almost to the window more than to Logan. "He just didn't know it yet." They sat like that, 2 generations bridged not by blood, but by duty, by something stronger. Outside, a bus passed. Kids laughed. The world moved on. But inside, time slowed to a reverent hush. Logan's hand moved across the table. Not fast, not dramatic, just resting gently on Walter's wrist. And Walter didn't pull away. There was no speech. No forgiveness offered, because none was asked. Just the presence of 2 men. One who had once saved a life, and one who had just returned the debt. A waitress passed by, and quietly slid over a check neither would pay. The manager, watching from a distance, simply nodded once and turned away. As the sun dipped lower, its golden wash touching the side of Walter's face, Logan asked quietly, "What now?" Walter looked out the window. A boy was holding the door open for a veteran on crutches. A couple stood, helping an old man sit. The world had not changed overnight. But in this corner of it, something had shifted. "Now," Walter said, finishing his coffee in one long, deliberate sip. "Now we show up, quietly, like always." They both stood. No handshake, no salute, just a look exchanged between them, as if to say, "We understand." And then they walked out together, side by side. The story of what had unfolded that day did not stay in the courtroom. It began quietly, as these things always do, with a school teacher mentioning Walter Keene during a lesson on dignity, with a pastor referencing honor in silence, with an old barber pausing when a curious teenager asked why there was a new flag folded in a case above the mirror. No headline, no cameras, but the name moved. In the weeks that followed, small things began to change in places that never noticed men like Walter. A high school senior picked up a crumpled flag lying in the mud outside a park building, and raised it again, without being asked. A group of kids who used to laugh when a disabled vet walked by began to stop, hold the door, or say, "Thank you." At the local diner, an extra plate was left on a counter near the window, just in case someone older, someone quiet, came in alone. Walter never spoke of the courtroom. He never spoke of the salute or of Logan's voice cracking when he said the word apology. But people spoke for him. A letter was pinned to the wall of the town library by a teenager who had watched the video clip online. A letter that simply said, "I want to grow up to be that kind of man." A podcast host in another state told the story, ending in silence. A newspaper, small and local, printed one word in bold above a photograph of Walter and Logan walking down the steps. Strength. When people said his name now, quietly, carefully, they didn't look around to see if others were watching. They just said it with a nod, a pause, a silence that carried more weight than any tribute ever could. At the edge of the Veterans Garden near the courthouse, a small plaque was placed. It didn't list medals, just a name, Walter Keene, and a single line, "He stood when others turned away." In a nearby school, a child's essay began with 5 words. Walter Keene stood for us. In the back of a dusty chapel, a candle was lit beside his name. No announcement, no sermon, just quiet recognition. At the town's tiny library, a shelf appeared labeled "Stories That Stay," and his name was there. Not as an author, but as the reason the shelf existed. And so the legacy stretched, not in banners but in gestures. A student helping a vet carry groceries. A teen stopping his friends from mocking a stranger. A young woman pausing before speaking, as if to remember the tone Walter once used. Soft, firm, unshaken. He never asked for this. He never tried to teach. But somehow, the town had learned anyway. Not through orders, but through the outline of a man who stayed still long enough for others to see themselves differently. And somewhere, in the breeze of a late afternoon, a flag turned once, caught the sun, and kept waving. As Walter stepped outside into the golden hush of evening, the town felt different, quieter, softer. A light breeze stirred the edge of his coat as he paused beneath the courthouse step. Logan stood beside him, but said nothing. Across the street, people had gathered, not to cheer, not to speak, but simply to watch. Hats removed, heads slightly bowed. No orders had been given. No speeches read. Walter adjusted the triangular flag case in his arms, his fingers lingering a moment on the burn mark along its edge. A memory flickered, dust, noise, the weight of a man on his back, and the promise made without word. From a second-floor window, a child saluted. Walter saw it, and nodded once. That was enough, and in the silence that followed, you could hear the flap of the flag from the square. The same one someone had raised again that morning. Still waving. Still here. If you've ever wondered what dignity looks like, this is it, Logan said softly. If this story moves something in you, drop one word in the comments. Respect. For every name forgotten, every promise kept. And if you still believe honor lives quietly among us, stay with us. More stories like this deserve to be heard.